Hi, I'm Graham Glynn, Assistant Provost and Executive Director for Teaching, Learning plus Technology at Stony Brook University. And this is Innovations in Education. In our show, we feature faculty and staff using innovative approaches and best practices in teaching, and applications of educational technology that have had a positive effect on student learning. In this show, I'm joined by Lee Miller, an Associate Dean in the College of Arts and Sciences and a Professor in the Department of Philosophy. We'll be discussing the challenges of teaching students who are recent graduates of high school. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Graham. I really appreciate the opportunity to get a chance to have a discussion with you about this important matter.
Now, part of your responsibility is to mentor new faculty, and you're also formally a high school teacher. So how well prepared are high school students for the transition into classrooms in the college setting?
Well, I think there's sort of three factors you have to keep in mind here. The first one is that we are being more selective than before at Stony Brook, so we're getting some of the very best prepared students out of high school. But the second thing is that moving from a high school environment to a college environment, you have to remember that our freshmen only 3 months earlier, at least in September, 3 months earlier from September, they were just high school seniors. And depending on how they spent their senior year, they're either more or less prepared for what's going to hit them in college. I think the most important, significant difference is that almost none of them have been in the large-sized classes that many of our freshmen want to take because of what they have in mind for either their careers or their majors. So if they're taking chemistry or they're taking psychology, which are very popular introductory freshman courses, they're going to be in groups of hundreds. Mm-hmm. And I think the new anonymity is, from the student perspective, both puzzling, somewhat off-putting, but also they quickly find out that it has certain advantages in terms of being able to do things that they never could do during class when they were in high school. So I think the crucial response to this on the part of college faculty is to understand that they've made an important transition. The third factor is that this transition is not just a transition in the learning environment, it's a transition in their social and living environment for many of them. If you're living on campus, it's the first time you've ever been on your own, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And that new kind of freedom and opportunity often can interfere with your being as organized as you need to be. For me, undergraduates in all 4 years aren't that different. And I don't think students now are worse than they were before, at least not in the 30 years and plus that I've been teaching at Stony Brook. But I do think that they face some new challenges, and I think that they're just as subject as students has always been to the main things that get in your way as an undergraduate, I think, are impulse and chaos. That is to say, you're somewhat at the mercy of your impulses, and you no longer have the stable structure of your family environment to counter that. And you've never had to organize yourself very well before because you always had parents there and it was their home and they kept it organized because they knew what chaos would do.
But what impact does that have in the classroom? I know
the impact that it has in the classroom is that you have to decide whether you can study when you don't feel like studying. That's what impulse is about. And now we have 1,000 new distractions for you. Mm-hmm. I tell my students in philosophy, look, everybody falls asleep when they read philosophy. Some of it is really boring. But people who are interested in philosophy, when they wake up, they go back and try reading it again. Mm-hmm. People who aren't interested in philosophy go to Facebook, go to their computer, go to television, go to something that's more distracting. I think there are more distractions now, and if you don't feel like studying, the impulse to go look at one of those distractions is a lot easier to attain. You don't even need to go out of your room to do this. And you can do it in the library when you thought you were studying if you take your laptop with you. So and everybody takes a cell phone everywhere. So there's texting, there's Facebook, there's all these ways of interacting. Social interaction has always been something you need to balance against the time you need to study in college. So I think that these two things really interfere, and I think that part of the psychosocial tasks of growing up in college is to decide how you're going to handle your impulses and get some practice at that, and to decide whether or not you can get your life in at least enough order that you can do something besides just show up for classes.
So this impulse control, is this a problem in the classroom for freshmen?
Sometimes. I think a lot will depend there on how engaging the classes are. Obviously, one of the things that we have worked very hard at Stony Brook to do, and some of it's thanks to you, is to use some of the new technologies in the classrooms in ways that involve students. So the clickers that they use, for example, in the chemistry classes, are a really good way to find out whether students have understood something you just presented. I know from one of my colleagues in chemistry that she has completely revised the way she teaches organic chemistry in ways that get students involved. And that's another large class, although it's usually for people that are beyond freshman year. So whatever we can do to get students active and involved in the classroom setting is really important. It also helps us to remember that in high school, you really didn't need to study a lot out of class because you had 5 classes a week and they went over stuff so many times that if you were bright at all, you could just remember it. You're only going to hear it once in a college class. Even if you go to the recitation, it's going to be a little different than the class. The textbook's going to be a third source of information. You really have to capitalize on all of them, and that takes time away from other things that are easier.
Should faculty explicitly say this to the students? Look,
I don't see
we're going to
why.
go over this once. It's up to you to actually read it. This is no longer high school. You have responsibilities for your learning outside the classroom.
I would never mention high school if I could help it. I would say that, you know, here's how we work this in this class. If you want to succeed, these are the things you really need to do. You may not be used to this because of where you were in school before, because we have transfer students too, and sometimes some of the places they transfer from are really not like the 13th and 14th grade. So you really have to expect a lot in the sense of telling students that you expect a lot and yet not be surprised at some immaturity in their response. It seems to me that if you've had children of your own and you've watched them grow up, it's perfectly reasonable and easy to be sympathetic with that. And the real thing that I think faculty need to do is never hide behind the subject matter they're teaching, but use the subject matter as a way of reaching out to the student so that they understand you're there to support their learning. Because as a faculty member, you're not going to be able to do anything about students' social life. You really can't interfere with their personal lives. That's really none of your business. And you have to give them a chance to try some things out on their own. And that's what their parents have done by sending them to Stony Brook. So what we're there to do is to really focus on their learning. And the best thing we can do, I think, is to convince students by our affect and by our comportment and by the way we deal with them that we are sympathetic to the problems they have, we're sympathetic to the pressures on their time, and at the same time we know that they're old enough to organize themselves so that they can get a certain amount of work done outside of class. Because from the student perspective, grades are pretty important, and to get the grade they want, there's no way that they're going to attain that without taking that time and doing that work.
For most of my professional life, I taught in professional schools where most of the students were coming in with a baccalaureate or even in many cases a master's degree. And they were mature. When I asked questions, they interacted with me. They asked a lot of questions themselves. In the opportunities I've had to teach undergraduate classes, I've found that getting that interaction with those students is like pulling teeth. And it surprises me because I always think coming out of high school, they're coming out of these groups of 20 or 30, there has to be discussion going on, interaction. Why aren't they doing that when they come into college? And do you have any input on that?
Well, I think an awful lot of people are very, very hesitant to speak up in a large group. I sometimes tell my students when I have larger groups, look, everybody has this nightmare where you stand up in a class or you sit in class and you make a comment and, oh my God, it's a dumb comment, and you have this fantasy that everybody in the room is going to turn around and point at you and say, ah, ha, ha, ha. And
you know, there's an easy strategy to overcome that.
Yes.
Sit in the front row.
That's
what I used to do.
That's an easy. I have told students that come from other colleges when I advise in the summertime for transfer students, I tell them, sit in the front and pretend you're the only one in the class.
Yeah.
And then
you're having an intimate conversation with the instructor. Nobody else exists in the room.
That's true, but that doesn't do anything for the you know, they're going to have a hard time sitting in the front of the class because there's going to be 30 other students in a group of 300 who 10% at least already know that strategy.
Yeah.
And so getting a seat even in the second row is difficult. So I agree with you that, that's one way to do it, but if you can explicitly mention that fear, sometimes that undercuts it a bit. And the other thing you can say is, no matter what question you ask, I'm interested in what you're asking and why you're asking it and how I can answer it so as to help you.
There are no dumb questions, only dumb answers.